Okay, we're moving on, and now we're going to move on to the digestive system. And this is quite a fun one because I love to eat and makes you appreciate all that it does for you. So, with this one, as it says, don't make it upset. You don't want to upset stomach because an upset stomach is something that is quite difficult to deal with. So, let's get into this. Now, with the digestive part, the system's actually like a long tube if you think about it. And if you remember when I talked about during development in the early stages, you either develop your mouth first or your anus first. Because it's this long internal system of tubing is going to be key for all organisms. You got to get food in and out. Now, what the digestive system does is it breaks down food, and we do it two ways. We do it both chemically and mechanically. And we have to break it up into the smaller molecules so we can absorb it in your body. Now, this is much, even with this system, you have to have a bunch of players come in, this huge orchestra coming together. Everyone has to go through it. We've got to provide the fuel, the building blocks for survival of the body. And your digestive system, if we can't get the building blocks in, pretty much everyone else is going to fail. So let's talk about the different parts. So you're going to have the GI gastrointestinal tract, which will be like the main tract, and then you're going to have some accessory organs. Now, your GI tract is going to be your mouth, which is your oral cavity, your esophagus, which goes into your stomach, boom, 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 into your small intestine, your large intestine, your rectum, and then your anus. Now, your accessory organs are going to include your saliva glands. It'll be your gallbladder, your liver, and your pancreas, which is shown right there. Now, all these are super important, and the reason you have these accessory organs, is they help contribute substances to aid in digestion. Now, how's this all regulated? Well, thanks to your nervous and your endocrine system. So, as I mentioned, nervous system's the big guy in charge, but your endocrine system is going to actually help release some hormones that are going to be very essential. So depending on the type of diet you consume will determine different parts of your digestive components. The big difference is herbivores versus carnivores. Now we fall into this where we're mostly an omnivore, so we eat both plants and meat. But herbivores, so think about cows, sheep, goats, they're actually ruminants, and their stomach is actually divided into 4 components. If you ever want to know more about that, I took a whole semester on ruminant nutrition in grad school. I could tell you all about it. Actually, my research was actually using how their stomach actually breaks apart condensed tannins in their stomach. So if you're ever bored and you want to talk about goats and stomachs and how they do weird things, I'm your girl. Now, with this, it's not just enzymes. You remember enzymes are like the helpers. They're made of they're protein molecules that kind of go through and break things down or build things up. They're like your little assistants. Them combined with bacteria are going to work together to aid in the digestion, because you do have your own population of bacteria, especially in your small intestine. So you remember Jamie Lee Curtis, she's always telling you eat your bacteria yogurt. You got to have that population. And, you know, if you get that out of track, get your biome out of track, things can go bad. So don't forget to eat your good bacteria yogurt sometimes. So let's kind of start at the beginning with the oral cavity. So your teeth are going to go through and mechanically grind your food to increase the surface area. Now, the reason we do this is so it's easier to swallow so you don't choke, but also to create and increase the surface area. More surface area, the more places for the bacteria and the enzymes to attach to the different smaller parts of the food molecules and break it down. Now within that, you do generate a lot of saliva. The reason is you got to help moisten and lubricate the food, and this is all from your salivary glands. Now within that saliva, you're going to have mucus, you know, and then lots of enzymes. Amylase will be one, it's going to target your starch. Your lipase, remember, lipase is a good indicator, and it's an enzyme, and that's going to target your lipids. And then all this is going to help kind of break it down, because we want to give it like a head start. Because we want to make sure that, you know, we're getting the most out of this food before it's expelled from your body as waste. Now, when you're going through and chewing your food, you're making it into a bolus, and then what you're going to do is push it into your pharynx via your tongue, and this is called the process of swallowing. So this is a cool video where it actually shows forgot, it's MRI, something like that. It shows someone swallowing both food and water, and you can actually see the bolus and see how it goes through. Now, this is an involuntary process, and you want to make sure you get it down the right pipe. So when we do the respiratory system, you're going to see we have the trachea, which goes to the lungs, and then the pharynx that's going to go down, larynx and down to, you want to make sure you go down to the stomach via the esophagus. So you want to make sure that we do not go down the wrong path, because we don't want to send food into your lungs or water, you don't want to drown yourself. You've probably done that before where you drink something too fast or something happens and you cough like crazy because it feels like you went down the wrong pipe. I've used that term before. It just happens, but that little flap is very, very important because you want to make sure that if we're going down to the stomach, we go esophagus route, not into the larynx, because that will go into the lungs. So it kind of makes you appreciate this process just a little bit more. And it's interesting, like I said, this is all controlled by the nervous system. It's involuntary. My father, his neurodegenerative disease, one of the things that was affected was swallowing. It was really interesting. Like, he couldn't even just swallow water. We had to thicken it. It was a really interesting process to watch how that affected a person. So if you ever want to talk about that, you can set up a meeting with me. I can talk about all that. It was called PSP. It's very similar to Parkinson's, and it's very interesting to watch, especially as a biologist. So your good old esophagus is a tube leading from your mouth to your stomach. And this is that thing I was talking about. I've done this before, and it looks like you're choking to death, but it's happened. So the process of pushing the bolus down your esophagus is called peristalsis. So basically, this is just a contraction to the circular and longitudinal muscles that go down and help us go through and push it down to the stomach. Now, there's going to be some sphincters at the top and the bottom that form your esophagus. And those are going to be important because you want to make sure you kind of regulate what goes in and out. That one at the bottom is super important because your stomach has a very acidic environment, and you don't want that acid coming up. Now, that lower sphincter is called the gastroesophageal sphincter. As I mentioned, when it malfunctions, the stomach acid goes into the esophagus, and that's what causes heartburn. Let's talk about your good old stomach. Some of us have bigger stomachs than the others. It's quite amazing. Now, within your stomach is where you're going to have the chemical and mechanical digestion occur. So how this is going to happen is called the process of churning. So basically, churning is where it's just moving in all different directions. You have different layers of muscle, both circular, longitudinal, diagonal, and it's just kind of going through and just moving it all around. If you've ever made bread and you're like kneading the dough, you're kind of going at it in multiple different ways, kind of break up that gluten. I've been watching a lot of British baking shows at this time too. But you're going through that churning part. The reason we're doing that is so we're getting those enzymes in there, breaking it apart. Sometimes we have to break up your food into smaller components because you're not a heavy chewer. Now, inside your stomach, you have a lot of folds, which is great because it allows for a good Thanksgiving. You can eat more than you think you can, which is great. Like I said, it was just Thanksgiving a few days ago. Thank you, stomach. Now, one thing about the stomach, it does have that pH range that is very acidic, between 1.5 and 2.5, and that is very, very, very painful. So that's why heartburn hurts so bad, because most of your body, if you remember, the internal pH is around 7. Between 7 and 8, so that's why the stomach acid is really, really, you want to keep it exactly where it is, and that's why those sphincters are super, super important to keep it within the top and the bottom. Now, once you have those contractions bend, you're going to take those gastric juices and form chyme, and this chyme solution will form about 2 to 6 hours, and it'll stay around there, and then it'll be ready to enter into the small intestine. Now, one thing I want you to understand is in the stomach, it's mostly about breaking it down. It's going to be in the small intestine where we're going to do most of the absorption. So your sphincter down at the bottom, that's going to control going between the stomach and the small intestines, called the pyloric sphincter. So let's go into your intestines now. So next up is the small intestine, all right? It's right after your stomach. Now, this is quite fascinating. It's about 6 meters long, almost 20 feet in length. I find that fascinating. The human body is quite amazing. Now, within your small intestine, this is where we're going to do a lot of the absorption of the smaller molecules, and it's going to go into your bloodstream. You have these little indentations, they're called villi, and what they do is provide a lot of surface area. And within these villi are microvilli. And if we took all the surface area of the inside of your intestines and calculated, it's about 300 square meters, which is about the area of a tennis court. I know that's quite fascinating. You wouldn't think about that, but that's your small intestines. Now, we do break it up into three parts. You have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Those are your three parts. And depending on which part will determine how much is being absorbed. It's actually the first 30 centimeters of duodenum is where most of the digestion is completed. The rest is where most the nutrients are absorbed and extracted from the food. So most of the digestion, breaking it apart, is going to be in the stomach and the very first part. And the absorption is going to be in this later parts. Now, these molecules are broken up into small components, and they're going to be absorbed in the bloodstream via those epithelial cells in the small intestine. And then those are going to be transported all throughout the body because your body needs all those small nutrients. So after that, we're going to move into the large intestine. So by the time we reach this point, most of the nutritive substances have been removed. We're at this point where we're going to start being the compacting of waste. Now, the main job of the large intestine is to absorb water, and we need to compact it into feces so we can get it ready to move to rectum for elimination. Now, there's going to be two sphincters that are going to regulate the excess of the feces. Now, the parts of this, you're going to have the cecum, the colon, and the rectum, and this is where you're going to see a few other of your little helpers too. Now, the cecum, boom, 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 right here, is a pouch just loaded below the junction of the small intestine and large intestine, and then you're going to have your appendix kind of go and extend to this region. This appendix is just something that baffles people. It's thought to have no purpose. Maybe it's where you keep an extra reservoir of bacteria. It's shown that you can have it removed and be okay, but appendicitis can be quite deadly. It can kill you. So this little guy, I don't know what he's doing here. It's just one of those. Maybe he had a big role earlier on through development, but evolution has kind of told us this guy's useless. You're going to have your colon next. And this is where we're going to go through and absorb most of your water. It's about 1.5 meters in length. It's the largest part of the small intestine. And then finally, this is where the rectum is at the end, where we have the storage site. Now, large intestine is where you have a huge population of bacteria, and their job is there to make vitamins and provide some immunological benefits. And bacteria do make up a large part of your feces, a lot of the dead parts right there. So let's talk about some of the helpers. Now, we need to use those enzymes to help catabolize that food and break it into smaller parts. Now, one of the big ones right there is the pancreas. It's going to secrete several enzymes, trypsinogen, chymotrypsin, amylase, nucleases, bicarbonate, and insulin. Oh my gosh, my poor little dog has dealt with pancreatitis so much. These little breeds, like I said, I have a little Yorkie. I just had him in the hospital a few weeks ago with pancreatitis. High-fat diets trigger him, and then it upsets his pancreas, and next thing you know, he's throwing up constantly. His whole system goes out of whack, and he almost died from this last time. So now he's on this expensive, low-fat prescription dog food, and he's doing well now. He loves it. But this happens to some people. They have to really watch what they eat because high-fat foods can actually trigger their pancreas to go overreactive, and things can go bad. Your liver is part of this. It is actually one of your largest internal organs. And it goes through and actually detoxifies your blood by removing some of the toxins. And what it's going to do, destroy your old red blood cells and convert them into hemoglobin into a bioproduct. And also a big source of storage of glucose as glycogen. And then when you need it, it's where we can break it down and actually use it later on. And then finally, your gallbladder aids the liver by storing bile and concentrating bile salts. It also helps with emulsification of lipids. You are able to survive without your gallbladder. I know my mother had to have hers taken out, but it does affect your diet and how you can go through, and certain foods can actually trigger you, and like my mother says, goes right through you. I know it's kind of gross, but it is. So nutrition labels. Hopefully by now you go back and you remember the macromolecules. So learning to read these, I've had to learn to really read these, especially with my dog, especially when it comes to treats, what he can have. But the whole nutrition, you need to make sure that you have a balance. And there's all those different diets out there. If you're going the keto route, you're going high for proteins and eliminating the sugars. There's all the different ones out there. I've heard about where they have the high fat diet, and it's a balance, whatever works for you. The main components are you have your carbs, which are your simple carbs. You want to kind of avoid those. You want to use the more complex ones because it takes more effort for your body to break down. But basically, you break your carbs down into glucose, and remember, glucose is the input for cellular respiration. Now, we can't digest cellulose, so big reason why you see corn come out the way it goes in. And when you have those excess sugars, so you had those little treats over this last holiday, your body's like a hoarder. It's going to store what you don't use, and one way it does is store it as via glycogen. Now, proteins are super important. If you remember, they make up the component of the subunits for the amino acid, and you need those. There are 9 that are essential and have to be consumed in your diet, and your body can make 11 of the other ones. Now, fats, we do break them down into smaller components, your monoglycerides and your fatty acids. And remember, they are key for your cell membranes, but you need to make sure that this is something kept in regulation. But we do need some fat in your diet. Now, vitamins, you've heard of those, vitamins and minerals in your different diets. You can use as supplements. Some of them will help assist enzymes. They're called coenzymes. And other ones will act as cofactors, and they will help with muscle and nerve function. So hopefully, if you want more information about reading levels and how much you should present, and I think this is something that, just a suggestion, everyone has their own things that work for them. Use what works for you. So as usual, here are some review videos about the digestive system, and then credit for my images.